Okay, today we are going to talk about whether the US dollar is headed for collapse. Now, all fiat currencies or paper currencies, meaning I declare it as having value, they've all collapsed and they've all followed the same cycle. Over the last 3,000 years or so, Rome, Spain, Great Britain, even more recently Argentina, Zimbabwe, all of these currencies that their governments print turn to less and less of value because they print so much of it. And so what I'm going to show you first is actually real money. Okay, so if you look closely at this, you're going to see this is a 1 troy ounce silver coin. Okay, a troy ounce is slightly larger than a regular ounce, but silver and gold has always been real money. And if you've looked at the prices for silver and especially gold over the last even year or so, they've spiked massively. And this shows an erosion of trust in the US dollar. Okay, so let's talk about the 7 stages of the fiat cycle, the fiat currency cycle. Okay, so stage 1 is gold-backed stability. Now, up until 1971, you could turn your paper US dollars into physical gold at any bank. And I believe the exchange rate was $35 per ounce. All right. By the way, today, as of I'm filming this video, gold is over $4,000 per ounce. Okay, so that shows the erosion and the purchasing power of a US dollar versus a single ounce of gold. Okay, and so stage 1, things are stable because you can just turn your paper money into gold coins or ounces, right? And so stage 2 is the government starts spending. Spending increases, right, as things ramp up, as GDP increases, as more people are born, as technology advances, and so the government starts spending more to expand more, okay? And stage 3 is the government starts getting into more wars, financial deficits, meaning your expenses exceed your income. So the government spends more money to maintain its strength, its military, its infrastructure, its all different subtypes of spending there, and so they spend more than they make. Okay, so that means they take on debt, and once the debt becomes unsustainable, they then move off of the gold standard. Now, this has happened in a lot of different forms, right? Whereas in previous civilizations, they would use actual silver coins or gold coins, and they would slowly debase them. They would slowly reduce the amount of actual silver. Instead of being pure silver, they drop it down to 90, 80, 70% because, well, it's cheaper to make silver coins that have less silver in them. So that's essentially the same version that we have today of diluting the money supply. Okay, so stage 4, expansion, prosperity, but at the cost of hidden inflation. So when the economy expands, when people are prosperous, they have a good standard of living, technology advances, they can afford to buy homes and cars and vacations and nice clothes and things. The government continues always to spend more than they make, and then take on more and more debt. And the more money is printed, the more the actual currency is eroded and inflated and diluted. And so inflation occurs. So a previous $3 hamburger all of a sudden is $5, $6. Or if you go to Five Guys now, I don't know what the price is, but what is it, $10 or $15 for a hamburger that just a few years ago cost only a few dollars? So that's real life inflation in real time. And who feels this the most? The working class people that live paycheck to paycheck. The elites don't feel this because they have assets. They live in their bubble and in mansions, and they don't even care because they're so far removed from that. Okay, so stage 5 is money printing accelerates. So for the US, for example, since COVID, the number is somewhere around 40% of our total money supply has been printed since roughly the year 2020. And so what happens is more money circulates throughout the system, and then businesses and people demand more money for the same goods because each dollar is worth less. Okay. Unfortunately, though, wages do not really rise here. The job you have doesn't want to pay any more. If anything, they want to automate your job with AI or offshore your job. And so, unfortunately, the working class, the middle and lower class, get hit the hardest here because they don't actually see any wage increases. All right. Step 6, and by the way, the U.S. is somewhere around here. Step 5, step 6. Massive money printing, obvious deficits, over 38 trillion as of the time of this video being recorded. And that causes a lack of trust. So, when countries see and central banks see around the world that, wow, the U.S. just printed a ton of money, and because of the reserve currency status of the U.S. dollar kind of being tied to the global financial system, most countries and people trade in U.S. dollar. That inflates the price of everything, and that gets everyone screwed up because they say, I guess, the same dollars we were using previously don't buy as much of product. I don't like that. That doesn't feel good. I want to look at other options. So loss of trust is stage 6, which is right before stage 7, which is the collapse of the currency. Okay, so with a loss of trust, countries and people look to diversify their assets. They look to buy real estate, physical gold, silver, even digital currencies like crypto, stock, really anything they can get their hands on because the paper dollars feel lighter and lighter every year. And so the collapse can happen over a few years or even decades or faster. And what happens is a new system emerges. So this is what everyone is worried about right now. What is coming next? If the US dollar is going to be not the reserve currency of the world, what could replace it? Would it be Bitcoin? Could it be the Chinese yuan? Is it the Russian currency? What is coming? The euro? People don't know. There's no clear answer right now. And so that's the $1 million question. Okay, so this cycle has never failed in 5,000 years. So let's talk about some of the historical examples of all this actually happening. So Rome, the Roman denarius collapsed when they took the denarius, which was either pure silver, right, or gold coins, and instead of this one being 0.999 purity, basically pure silver, they said, no, let's drop that down. When we mint these coins, let's drop it down to 90%. People won't really notice, right? And then we don't have to use as much silver to pay our people, so we're saving money, right? And then Rome, when it collapsed, their coins were 5% silver or gold. So it was largely copper or some other material with a thin coating of gold or silver, okay? And then Their soldiers could not get paid and buy anything with these basically worthless coins. They weren't stupid. They could rub them off, scratch off the plating and be like, hey, this is copper. This has no value, right? And then that is when the collapse happened, when the currency got eroded to basically nothing, okay? The French currency collapsed during the French Revolution. It was changed over and introduced a new currency with the franc. Similar story, paper being worthless, they print or make too much, and then people don't trust and it doesn't buy as many products. Okay, Weimar Germany. After the World War, and Germany had to pay reparations, and there were reports of people taking wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a few loaves of bread to survive. That is hyperinflation. Okay. Same thing with the British pound, the loss of the reserve currency status, debt, war, inflation. They print to pay off their debts, and they cannot sustain that. Okay, so a loss of trust because of inflation, because of printing causes inflation. Okay, and so what are some of the U.S. dollar warning signs? What are some flashing red signals that some of this is happening right now? We have a debt spiral, right? Right now, the country is over $38 trillion. That's the national debt. And we're running trillions of dollars in deficits every year. So we're spending way more than we are bringing in. And Trump is trying to, put tariffs to make people pay and increase the government income, which is only making costs go up for, unfortunately, Americans, who are the real people who pay tariffs. It's a consumer tax. You pay the price because the business imports their goods, and you pay the difference when they increase their price. And so with this debt, we now have over 25% of the national income going simply to interest payments alone to service the debt, which, by the way, is higher than the entire military spending. So a question to you would be, at what point does this become unsustainable, right? What if the national interest payments just to pay off the debt every year in interest is 50%, right? 60%. What gets cut? What happens from there, right? And also another alarm signal is when the debt to GDP ratio gets too high. When the debt to gross domestic product ratio becomes too high, that is seen as a big stress signal, and that causes a lack of trust and all kinds of systemic financial problems. Okay, so with QE and money printing, that's the government's really only answer. They never want to cut benefits. They do not want to increase taxes, because those two ways are how they get voted out of office. So the only other thing to do is QE, or quantitative easing. It just means printing money, right? Turning on the printing press. And so with 40% of our currency printed since COVID, that sends shockwaves through the entire economy. Rent goes up, car prices go up, food, insurance, everything costs more money, but unfortunately your wages do not keep up with inflation, because corporations and businesses do not want to pay you more because they have all the leverage and all the power. Okay, so money supply turns into a hockey stick chart. So it goes kind of flat and then starts to go exponential. And if you look at the total money supply, you'll see since COVID, all of a sudden they've printed so much money, and that dilutes everything in the system. Okay, so with the Fed, with their inflation target of around 2%, that was the previous goal. And now Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, is talking about, no, let's settle on 3%. And then and they're even discussing just not even focusing on this metric. So that is a huge alarm sign when they're just upping the acceptable rate of inflation, meaning things are accelerating, costs are going up faster. And this, by the way, compounds. So 2% just doesn't mean something that was $1 10 years ago is, 20% more. It compounds over itself every year, and that's the actual cost you feel. So declining global trust ensues. People look for other currencies, other forms to store their wealth, and ways to trade. And then what you see is, and a big indicator of this is people and countries and central banks buying gold. So you can see financial charts. I've seen them on Twitter and other places, on X. But central banks are buying tons of gold, more and more over the last 5 years or so, because they see the warning signs of the currency eroding, the trust going down, and they want to pivot into safe haven assets. Okay, so that will basically mean the de-dollarization. This has been a phrase that's been popping up. People looking to trade in things other than the U.S. dollar. Okay. And so, what does this collapse actually look like? Well, usually it happens as a slow decline. So the dollar debases, inflation goes up, costs rise. You don't get paid really that much more, and inflation stays high and sticky. Now, they were talking about inflation being a transitory type of period, but that is not the case. When prices go up, they usually never come down. Okay, so whether it's from tariffs, inflation, companies don't want to lower their prices because they don't want to lower their profits because shareholders will get mad at them, and that's the real business they're in. Okay, so standards of living start to drop too. So maybe before, in the 70s, 80s, even 90s, you could afford on one salary. You get a college degree, you get a corporate office job, you can buy a house, 2 cars, and be married and have 2 or 3 kids all on one salary. But over time, what's happened? People drop down to only being able to rent, barely able to afford 1 car, not being able to have any kids. These are all warning signs that inflation is eating at people's buying power, which makes them feel mentally, in a downward spiral, and so standards of living decrease. Okay, so the middle class gets squeezed, right? The rich don't care. They have assets, they have businesses, they have stock, they have physical gold, silver, or they might have crypto. They just have assets, and they inflate with price, right? They go up with inflation, just as much as inflation, or if not more. Okay, it's the middle class and the poor that get hit the hardest because they don't have assets and they are paycheck to paycheck or just barely above water. So they feel it the most. And so at some point, a reset and a new currency appears. We don't know what that is yet. It could be a digital currency, like a central bank digital currency, CBDC. It could be gold. It could be silver. It might be a crypto. It might be a multi-currency type of situation where people exchange goods and services just depending on who they're doing business with or where they're doing business, right? And so that causes a rapid confidence shock, and at that point things collapse. All right. Now, what can people do to protect themselves? And I alluded to some of this just above, but the biggest thing you can do is increase your skill set. Work hard at your job, work hard at your skills. This day and age, having a side hustle is essentially mandatory. whether you're an Uber driver or you sell things online or you have social media making money, something like that, a second job even. And then you want to avoid debt and consumerism at all costs. So limit your spending, increase your savings, and invest in assets as much as possible. And then you diversify and you build income streams. Okay, you can't just rely on one thing. You need to have multiple different activities going on, and diversify and invest that way. Okay, so the answer is to educate yourself and protect yourself. Unfortunately, none of this is going to reverse course. It's already so deep, and if you look since the early 1900s, cost of living standards and things have been dropping as inflation and de-dollarization happen over time. And so click the video appearing on your screen, and I'll see you in that next video.